I'm from System 1, and I lead creative and media partnerships for us. So what I'm going to do is share what we do at System 1, touch on our Wise Up report, and we're going to see 6 really good ads that target the older generation. And what I'm really going to be answering, as well as that media question, is, how do we do good advertising that grows the long and short-term effectiveness with the older generation? To start off with, very similar to the white paper that's just been shared, there's a huge opportunity where obviously the older generation takes up a large amount of the population, and it's got a large amount of wealth. So there's a massive opportunity to brands that they're missing out. So I won't labour that point. What have we done with Wise Up? We have taken, and it took quite a while, so we've taken 1,000 ads of the largest media spend in 2021, and we coded them to look at the age and gender of the people that they represent in the advertising, to really understand that split between who's behind the camera and who's in front of the camera. We've then gone and used Test Your Ad, which I'll explain what Test Your Ad is, and we've tested 56 of them with a nationally representative audience and then an audience of 55 plus. So what we can do there, we can really see what we call the diversity dividend. So a creative can target a certain audience, and if you test it with the audience, we expect to see an uplift of effectiveness with the audience if you're doing your job correctly. So we can really understand the effectiveness of targeting creatively the older audience by looking at that dividend between that nationally representative audience and the 55 plus. But first of all, our metrics. Have we seen these before? We have, cool. So we test for a much more important question than what do consumers think, but how do consumers feel? Because the more they feel, the more they buy. We expose 150 people with Test Your Ad to an advertising stimulus, be it TV, radio, or out of home, and we measure the human universal emotions. The more positive it is, it plays on this heuristic that when a brand comes to mind and it feels good, it feels like the right choice. And those emotions last 1 to 10 years. That's how you're going to build brand in the long term. So that's where our star rating comes from, which you'll see in all these reports. Star rating predicts the long-term effectiveness. So the more positive you make older people feel, the better you'll be building brand with them in the long term. Spike rating is slightly different. We also measure emotional intensity of ads, because the more emotionally intense any emotion, not just positive, it will nudge you to do something there and then and change short-term behavior. And then we also measure fluency, so that correct brand recall at the end of the ad. So we've got some nice quantitative metrics, but we also get a lot of qualitative metrics as well. Emotional intensity, we ask everyone after they've told us how they're feeling, but why. And we also measure key associations, which we've used in this report. These facts are in the white paper, which is great. So what's interesting is that there's a massive mismatch between the structure of advertising and for older people. So 65% of kind of TV reach impacts the 55 plus. However, the average age of an agency employee is 34 years, and there's only 6% of employees of an agency that are over 50. However, only 23% of people in front of the camera are 55 plus. I was actually talking to someone yesterday from an agency that I've forgotten. But they're actually saying the mismatch as well, where media agencies are actually a lot younger than creative agencies, which is not something I'd realised before, but it's kind of true. A lot of people that work in media are even younger than what you find working in creative, which is really interesting. So this is kind of the insight to explain why some things are going wrong, which I'll get onto. So this is a second bit of research from our Feeling Seen research, where we developed this method called the diversity dividend, where we tested advertising with a national representative sample and then the custom sample of the people that the advertising was trying to represent. And we showed that in most of the cases, in fact, I think it was all the cases, there's a diversity dividend where you saw that that the targeted underrepresentative group, the advertising was a lot more effective with that group. However, it's not true for the older generation. So here we've got the top 27 of the 56 we tested, and you can actually see that, these 27 were the only ones that were above 3-star, so above average advertising, and we can actually see that only 5 of them actually performed better with the 55 plus audience, which we can see here. So there's only a couple that actually performed and had a diversity dividend. So actually we're correctly targeting creatively that 55 plus audience. So it's not as simple as this underrepresentative group just making them feel seen, like we saw in our Feeling Seen report, but there's other strategies that we need to employ creatively to actually get an increased effectiveness and talk to this group. And I'll share 6 of them now. So one is, it's not about just showing older people being represented. It's actually about entertaining them. So what was really impactful in the white paper was how little percentage, the older 55, said that they enjoy ads and they're entertained by ads. Byron Sharp came into our agency like a year ago, and he's a skeptic of all this fluff. But what he did say is if he was going to do creative testing, he'd just ask one thing: would you watch the ad again? And the fact that that is really low for 55 plus is really troubling. So we do a more sophisticated method than that. We test if it actually makes you feel positive. So the trick to doing that is actually using cultural references, which is actually a right brain creative feature, something that Orlando Wood talks about. Left brain being for our narrow, left brain feature being for our narrow beam attention, whereas right brain features being for our broad beam attention, which are emotional, storytelling, and look at the world as a whole. So here's a really great example of a cultural reference where Hovis have remade their iconic ad that I'm sure the 55 plus will recognize. Let's play the sound.
Last stop on round to be old Ma Peggerty's place. 'Twas like taking bread to the top of the world. 'Twas a grand ride back though. I knew Baker'd have kettle on and slices of hot ovis ready. Get it inside you, boy, he'd say. You must have gone up that hill as fast as you came down.
Hovis, as good today as it's always been.
So a few of the reasons why I like this is that creative wear-out doesn't necessarily exist. There's wear-out in kind of messaging power, but emotional brand-building ads only wear in. They don't really wear out. So literally, you've got all this gold in your brand archives that you could literally be doing this with. There's a great cultural reference to their old ad that became part of the zeitgeist, but also there's an intergenerational relationship there between those two characters. So secondly, so making the most of friendships. So this is kind of the start of a key theme where there's this mismatch between people behind the camera and in front of the camera. So there's not a representation of 55 plus behind the camera. So what we often see is stereotypes. Loneliness is probably the key one that's played on. And that's not necessarily what the other 55 want to see. They want to bust these myths. And what's a really key one to do this is friendship. So showing one of the positives about getting old is how you can start to nurture friendships. So showing that and playing that back to 55-year-olds, 55 and over, creates really good positive emotions and boosts long and short-term effectiveness. This is actually one of my favorite ads. So this is from Food Love Stories by Tesco. And what's great is that they've got this long-term running strategy that they're not changing just because they're doing an age representation ad, that it's fitting into their wider creative strategy. And you can actually see here the emotional trace second by second for the national representative audience, and the emotional trace for female 55 plus and over. So what's interesting as well is this is an all-female cast, and we often see that loneliness is presented, from what we saw, with male over 55-year-olds. So it's really good to see this.
Got the chili. Oh, brilliant. It's become a bit of a tradition over the years, my crispy pork noodles. The secret is getting the crackling extra crispy. girls love it after a... We may have met swimming,
Right, lunch.
but we became friends over a love of great food.
Come together and enjoy our Tesco finest ultimate pork loin joint. Food Love Stories, brought to you by Tesco.
So what's great is that this is just a right-brained emotional story that happens to have older people in. They're not the centre of the story. It's just a great story that everyone can enjoy. Up next, so another stereotype that we need to kind of bust as well, which will boost positive emotions, is this kind of idea that older people are bewildered by the world and can't use technology. And what this next ad does is subverts that using Schadenfreude, which isn't my favorite club in Berlin. That's a German phrase for laughing at someone's misfortune, but it's not done in a way that we're laughing at an older person here. It's the opposite, where that bewilderment is actually spun around. It's a what three words ad, which is a bit of technology that maps the area in the world to three words. And humour's used here to subvert that norm.
Hi, Gwen, right? Benji, I live just...
Benji, of course, from...
Yes. Hi. Bit of a weird one, but you haven't been getting any of my parcels, have you?
I love, can't say I have.
It's just I've ordered quite a few things online recently, and with our addresses being so difficult to find, I can see why it might get...
I'll let you know if anything arrives.
That's a brilliant ad. So Schadenfreude, where we're laughing at someone else's misery, is actually the most effective type of happiness at boosting long-term business effects that we found with the IPA. So really effective and very rarely used in advertising. So also experience is priceless. So this is something the UK is really, really bad at with our culture, where we actually celebrate our older generations. A lot of other cultures do it a lot better. So how do we actually bring that experience in and celebrate it? Here's a really, really good example from Pantene.
I'm known as the silver fox that'll knock you out of your socks.
I started noticing my gray hair when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. My natural instinct was to color over them. My hairdresser sort of gray shamed me into dyeing my hair for the 1 or 2 little grays. Beauty was very much defined by staying young looking.
Gray hair will make you old.
It's like, I'm old, which is ridiculous.
We absorb those thoughts from culture, what we're told.
It's a hair color. I mean, that's really what it is.
The gray hair is sexy, and I think it's the confidence that it brings.
Every single one of those gray hairs was like a hard-earned trophy.
Like I called it my superhero streak.
I'm gray, deal with it. Do not dye your hair. It looks good.
I would never change my gray hair.
So a great example of kind of celebrating one of the great things about getting older. And then number 5 of 6 is another way of dealing with that stereotype of loneliness, but playing on older people's role within community. A really obvious way of solving this is with family connection, but there's also that Cadbury's ad where the chocolate goes over the fence. That's not family, but it's showing the older people's role within a community and showing that betweenness is a very right-brain feature as well, of that won't just appeal to people interested in the product or who are older, it will appeal to everybody. So here's a great example of showing them as a part of the whole.
The thing with Dad is, he's always got a grand plan.
Very nice shots. That's what I thought. I thought it'd look a bit tropical.
It always starts with food. The spicier, the better. Then he'll get distracted by something shiny. Once he's got all the gear, there's no stopping him. Yep, that's my dad. Just a big kid, excited to meet a turtle. My cheeks hurt thinking about that day. And what a numpty he is. What a holiday that was.
Find your moments that matter with P&O Cruises.
Amazing. So it also breaks a lot of stereotypes as well, right? We're seeing a very clear theme here. And the last one, which kind of goes against some of the YouGov research, is actually celebrities. So there was only 7 ads that scored above 4-star, and 4 of them had celebrities in. So actually, using celebrities in the right way can unlock effectiveness for the older generation. It's important that, like all use of characters and celebrities, that they aren't wooden. So, you know, facial frontality, lack of expression and emotion. These things are all very bad things that lock into the left hemisphere of creative features. We need to see characters with agency, being very relatable, and ideally showing betweenness between characters. And here's a really good example of where I'm from and my favourite ad.
Morning, all. Morning. Brothers, sisters, today a great legacy rests upon your shoulders. Because here, we make more than just tea. We make proper brews. Brews that bring a tear to your eye and warmth to your soul. So go out there and do it for each other. Do it for yourselves, but most of all, do it for Yorkshire! Oh, and the fire drill's Thursday at 3.
Yorkshire tea, where everything's done proper.
So that kind of wraps up a lot of things, right? There's a betweenness that is clearly part of a greater whole there, and there's a great cultural reference because that was the Game of Thrones reference, right? So that's it from me. Here are the 6 tips on how to make more effective advertising for the older generations, both the long and the short. And I'm around for any questions later.